Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm your host this evening, Jesse Billington, and we're back to preview the 24th and final round of the 2025 Formula One season, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. To do this, I'm joined by Thiemo Albus Daly. How are you?
Not too shabby, thank you, Mr. Billington. We got to the end of the season eventually. I don't know if it's felt quick, if it's felt short, or somewhere in between. Probably a little bit of everything, it feels like. But we got there anyway. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I think I sort of share your sentiments on the fact that we've made it to the end of a very long season, but it feels like that final sort of section just flew by all of a sudden. We've sort of gone, oh, it feels like it's all over very quickly, which it is in
It's,
one
it's been a
respect.
long 3 weeks, but also how are we already there?
It's one of those 3 weeks where centuries happens. And to discuss the tail end of those 3 weeks where centuries happen, we are joined by friend of the podcast, Jenny Craig. How are you?
Well, it has been a lot, hasn't it? A lot's happened.
Hmm.
Well, even this weekend for Abu Dhabi, a lot's happened.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
just a lot to unpack from all of it, really, I think. Um, from FP1, really, everything started off being a bit strange. And we'll dive in with the news. Of course, the news since we were last on air. Toyota has become the official Haas title partner sponsor for 2026, meaning the team's official name will be the Toyota Gazoo Racing Haas, or TGR Haas for short, which I think is good. We've seen some important progress in the team, sort of mechanically, developmentally, financially. And also, I think TGR have a fairly good livery. I love the sort of the dark red, black, the red, the white, the grey. It sits with Haas's existing colour scheme to begin with. So I think it as a all-round package, it makes sense. And especially if you're Ritomo Miata, it offers some interesting avenues as well, because he is also a Toyota-backed driver.
with one of the aforementioned nice liveries to go with them. So, yeah, I'm happy to see the partnership continue into another year and to be improved and evolved in something bigger. But I think the thing I'd really love to see now is a concrete plan for that team moving forwards. Every other team on the grid, it feels like you know what they're intending to do or are in the process of doing. And you've got that a little bit even with Cadillac next year. But Haas, I don't know quite what their plan is for the next season, the next few years, 10 years, whatever. It's just they're there, and that's great. But I'd like to be a bit more from them now. You'd assume they'd call Toyota something, because otherwise you'd wonder why Toyota are getting even more involved, unless this is a slow and gradual move to Toyota coming back full time and Haas making a quiet exit stage left.
Sort of like Audi taking over Sauber. It's that sort of transitional phase. They don't enter as a new sort of works team out and out. They slowly take over an existing one. And obviously, this has sort of long-term ramifications for the team, and also, as we sort of mentioned as well, drivers that be looking to come back in. And you look at the drivers that they have for FP1, for instance, we had Rio Hirakawa, who is tied to sort of Toyota when it comes to endurance series, gives access to these sort of other drivers and these other platforms to get testing and viewpoints and development in, which is practical. Jenny, have you been following the Haas story diligently, or is this something that only Team and I are obsessed with, seemingly?
I'm not as passionate, but I think it is pretty good news. It's a team that doesn't have the biggest budget, and hopefully, I like the idea of an 11 team grid. I think it'd be a shame to lose them, and this backing seems pretty huge for them. So, brilliant.
Worth the shot. And of course, we've already mentioned Ritomo Miata sort of in the same breath because he is being retained in Formula 2. There's plenty of news coming out of that series as well. And Miata will be signing on for the 2026 season with High-Tech TGR. Obviously, a sort of a good link for him there. More importantly, Roda Motorsports have confirmed that Alex Dunn will continue to race for them next season, while MP Motorsports will be re-signing Ollie Goethe, and Gabriele Mini will move there for 2026 from Prema as well. Not a great series for Prema for the past few years, but MP have been a little more solid. So every chance this is a good move for Gabriele Mini.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. He was T13 this year, but no wins, which after being competitive in Formula 3 in that one season where I think it might have been 23, I think we got final around five drivers all for it. And he was in with a shout. And then we didn't really get much. 23 or 24, it all blurs together at this point. But I forget. All these young kids seem to be there for so long, and yet they're only about 18 or 19 years old. Yeah, I struggle to forget when these struggle to remember rather when these things happen. But yeah,
Gabriel
he's someone I
Mini
was kind of
came up.
hoping more from.
Yeah, Gabriel Mini
Um,
came up this season because he was beaten to the F3 title by
yes,
Leonardo Fornaroli in that last lap, last
would have
turn
been last
at
year.
Monza
Yeah.
last year. So this was, yeah, you can forgive him a little bit. This was his first season in the series, and a
Hmm.
series of cars that are seemingly quite tricky to get a handle on. It's taken a few drivers a fair old while to get used to them, and it's even taken Prema a fair while to get used to them. They're still not for what should be a spec series, and for what many drivers are coming out of the woodworks and saying isn't a spec series. Um, it's proving to be sort of an interesting one to sort of get a handle on if you're Prema, and yeah, hurdles to
Yeah.
overcome.
It's interesting to see who, and like you say, you take it with a bit of pinch of salt as well, but who is able to capitalize on F2 coming from F3 and who's struggling more with it. I mean, Miata's another one. He's 17 overall this year after we were expecting a lot more from him with the background and pedigree that he's got. I still think there's potential there, and we've seen before that 2 or 3 seasons is usually plenty of time to see what a driver is capable of. And I think we're just so used to seeing people like Fornaroli and Piastri coming through in being these one season wonders that when someone like Miata struggles, you go, oh, that's odd. But then you think, no, no, no. Drogovic, it took him a few minutes to get up to speed, but he got there eventually. Mick Schumacher, a couple of seasons, still got there. So it's not all doom and gloom yet. I think the year he's about the same this year. He's gonna have his second full season. He's gonna need a really good season as well to turn things around. He's another driver where I think he was probably hoping for a bit more. Whereas on the other hand, I think Dunn, P5 overall, he's been an interesting one to watch more off track this year than on with some of his decision making, I think. And I mean, Jenny, correct me if I'm maybe being too harsh here. Let's see what you think. But I think he got a bit too big in his boots earlier in the year when he left McLaren and then was kind of half expecting to join the Red Bull program. Red Bull went, no, thank you. And ever since he's sort of been miles away from the championship, I think that maybe served as a bit of a reality check to him. And he's now having to take the winter to maybe collect everything back up again and go, right, maybe I should have approached things a little differently. Or am I being too harsh?
Done for me reminds me a bit of an early Verstappen, as in he has so much pace, so much talent, but he is very, can't think of the word, he's not very careful in what he does as a driver. I think a lot of his moves, a lot of the mistakes that he's made are very, what's the word? I'm
I'm
very
struggling to
bad
think
with
of the word
words
now as well.
today.
I know what you're driving at, but I can't think of it either. Jesse, maybe you.
Unnecessary, I think's the word that I want to say. I think he could have easily have won the championship this year.
Hmm.
He was more than quick enough. That road in was more than quick enough, but he did it this weekend. He crashed with Victor Martins, ended both their races on a move that just was not on. And I think
Hmm.
until he irons it out like Verstappen did, I think he's going to really struggle to get F1 back in. He's more than capable. He just needs to maybe cool it a little bit when he's got his helmet on.
Judging
Yeah,
from the hip, it feels like more often than not off track this season as well as on. And you're going, if you just took the extra second to breathe before you take said shot, you'd hit the target a lot more than you are doing. Whereas I think he was able to kind of Wild West it, let's say, and hit enough of the targets early on that he thought that's the way to do it. But then the stakes got higher and the targets got trickier to actually hit, and things started to unravel a little bit from there.
Mm,
he's very much a driver who's sort of a send it and see kind of kid, which is very much the early Verstappen type. And even then, early on, it wasn't one that was sort of proving particularly fruitful, and he
Hmm.
had a fairly
It
strong
was enough to get
qualifying.
everyone's attention, but then keeping it was the challenge.
Yeah, because if you look sort of Bahrain feature race win, and then we go to Jeddah feature sprint race podium, and then it sort of tumbles for a bit. Then you get the win in the feature race at Imola, and then it tumbles all through Monaco, returns to the podium again for for Catalonia, sorry, tumbles again, gets disqualified, retires from a race, and then returns with a podium. It's very much sort of do or die his mentality, and we've seen drivers with that attitude come through Formula One, but they either become a Daniel Kvyat or they become a Max Verstappen. It goes one of two ways, and I think Dunn's got to realise that while it might get attention, he needs to show proof that he knows a different means of going racing.
We saw this with,
Um,
with Solov, right? In Formula 3, he was Fiat reborn a lot of the time when you go, my word, this is going to be interesting in all the wrong ways for all the drivers on track because they're going to be trying to avoid him like the plague. But then at some point this season or coming into this season, it changed. He was aggressive still, but there was more control, it felt like. And that's now benefiting him massively. He's just had his Formula 2 debut, obviously, does a pretty good job of it. He's there next year in a decent car with a decent team. That's a better blueprint, and he's more likely now to get into Formula One with Racing Bulls in 27 or 28. Whereas at the start of the season, you'd be thinking of the two of them, just because of the trajectories they appear to be on at that point, that would very much be the opposite case, be the other way around.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see how it boils out. But anyway, with the feeder series news out of the way, oh, and Trident retains Lawrence Van Hopen. I don't think we mentioned that. But
But
anyway,
I've got a great pun.
what's that?
He'll be hoping it goes better.
He will indeed, and I can very much see Chris McCarthy using that at some point in the early part of next season. But
You're welcome, Chris.
with the news out of the way, we'll
Continue.
jump into the all important team by team analysis from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We'll start, as we always do, with McLaren, the reigning Constructors' champions, and now, for the first time since 2008, the
Since
Drivers'
Lewis.
champion. Yes. Piastri qualified third and would finish second, while Norris would qualify second and finish an all important third. Thiemo, I'll let you start with your notes.
Trying to figure out what to say here because I think you sum it up. Well, what I've seen you write down in your notes is kind of some thoughts from your mind have summed it up pretty well on the Piastri front, definitely, in terms of what more could he do. You
Mm.
know, he qualified well. That Q1 lap that he put in was tremendous, and you just wish that could have come at the end. But I don't know how much good that would have done him ultimately. He had to get past Verstappen. That wasn't going to happen. Verstappen was once again on another level this weekend. We'll get to him in a bit, but again, 10th consecutive podium. He's podiumed in every single Grand Prix since Zandvoort, I think. So it was going to be tricky at best to overcome him. So I don't know what else Piastri could have done without some good luck from behind. But I found some interesting contrasts and mirroring, perhaps, with his teammates' first championship and Verstappen. So, like Verstappen, he's won in his seventh season in Formula One with the team that signed him as a junior driver. He's the first driver to win their first championship since Verstappen, and obviously also did it in Abu Dhabi, denying another driver from winning five titles in a row, and also won it in the last race of a regulation set. And Verstappen is now the first driver since, ironically, Hamilton in 21 to not win the title after winning eight or more Grand Prix in that season. So, some interesting stats and facts to come out of it. But in terms of how they both performed this weekend, it was sort of how you'd expect McLaren to ordinarily perform if we
Mm.
go back to the start of the season, which obviously our confidence and our faith in them has deteriorated massively over the entirety of the 2025 season, but it was pretty bog standard in terms of what you'd. There wasn't an engine going pop. There weren't, as far as I could tell, papaya rules happening, whatever the heck they are anyway, and no kind of messy pit stops. That was all relatively clean, so it was it was dull, but that's what they needed. I
Yeah.
don't know what to say. It just they did what they could set out to do. They did the quote unquote bare minimum to get what they needed to do, and they managed to not stumble into many of the potholes that have caught them out over the entirety of the rest of the year.
I mean, the bare minimum argument is an interesting one because Jackie Stewart once said that the best way to win a Grand Prix is possibly by driving the slowest because it eliminates all the risk.
It did
And
feel a little
therefore,
bit like that.
yeah. And I think McLaren have sort of very much embodied that across their championship. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted to put for this section when I sort of threw my notes onto a page this morning.
It's like I said, it was so straightforward. You go, what is there to say?
Yeah, it is. It's a bit how I described the Qatar Grand Prix last weekend, which was
Mm.
a nothing burger with plain fries. And I think Piastri put up a good fight this weekend, but the odds were just insurmountable. While mathematically he was in with the fight, so was Russell until like Las Vegas, but it was never going to happen. And Norris
You
was
needed
going like,
something to
yeah,
happen.
and Norris was going like a demon. If you watch back Norris's race across sort of the afternoon, there were some fantastic racing moves from Norris and some fantastic driving that I think had we seen him driving like that from the start, there wouldn't be any questions about whether or not he's a worthy champion or a worthy recipient of it or the sort of the most earned title or anything along those lines. Because he's shown us again, and we've seen it at points through the season, that he can drive like that. Silverstone was another one where Norris really showed what he can do when the pressure is on. And I think this was a great way for him to round out his season. And his move through the field after that pit stop were phenomenal. The double passes all round, the confidence to send it, the reliance on that car, and just the sheer to hell with you all, I'm coming through of it, which is what Max Verstappen had always embodied as a racer and what earned him those titles. And Norris did it with a level of sort of cleanliness and sort of the risk-free approach that's almost Alain Prost in its execution. I'm still a bit split on his move with Tsunoda, partly driven off track, partly overtaking off the track. It's sort of six of one, half a dozen the other. But ultimately, he was coming by regardless, and Tsunoda just didn't have the defensive skills of Perez needed to make the impact that any of the other drivers needed. Norris's drive was, yeah, like I said, one we should have seen all season long. But it's a great way to capitulate a championship and prove that he's earned it. And I have so little to say about Piastri, oddly. It was a great return to form
He
for
did
him.
nothing wrong. You
No.
know, he overtook Norris at the start, which was one of the crucial moves he had to make, and he just got on with his race. And I think that's well, it's not the problem, but I think, like you say, the problem with McLaren and maybe Norris here, and why there's so many mm, comments, questions, however you want to phrase it around it, is because if he had performed like he did in Mexico, say, or Zandvoort last year, all year long, or at least 90% of it, or how Piastri had been doing for that matter at the start of the season, the first two thirds,
Mm.
we none of those conversations would be happening. And you go, you are capable of it. So what was the struggle to do it the rest of the time? Where was that I don't want to say hunger, but hunger, let's say, that determination to do it? And yeah, you can become champion by finishing third, but do you not want that win? Do you not want to get that second place? And that's that interesting balance between risk and reward. And he was obviously willing to risk it to get back up there, like you say, with these double overtakes. But I think we haven't seen, I definitely haven't seen in my lifetime a champion become a champion this way. We're so used to drivers being ruthless
Mm.
to like they will you look at 2021, there was a reason no one else stood a chance there, is because they were knocking bells out of each other every single round, and regardless of if it'd been the other way around at the end of Abu Dhabi, it wouldn't have mattered. No one has a problem with whichever driver would have won that title. It was because they both deserved it. You look at Vettel, the exact same thing. You look at Button, he was ruthless because he knew this was maybe his one shot. Rosberg, obviously, he did everything possible and then a bit extra on
Mm.
some insane levels to give himself the best chance to become champion.
But then when you
And
look
we've
at,
not seen someone do what Fornaroli's done, for example, or Mara in F2 and F3, of just be consistent. We're not used to that working at an F1 level to have that consistency is key to win an F1 title. And that's where it's odd because we just haven't seen that in F1 and actually work to get a title.
and when we get the season that goes the other way, when you get a Verstappen 2023, for example, it gets written off as a completely boring season, one that's pointless to watch because it is just that
But
switch.
then you don't question the
Yeah,
champion
the
for
champion is still
like
proving
being
it.
deserving or proving
Yeah.
anything or getting lucky or having to do. And none of that comes because you go, yeah, he annihilated everyone.
Mm. I'll finish my point out on McLaren before I hand over to Jenny because I know we've prattled on for long enough. But yeah, for Piastri, great return to form. Opening move, really confident and changed the strategy of the
Mm.
race a little. It forced him, it forced Verstappen, it forced Norris to do something different. And I think it really urged it into a slightly more exciting race
It's
than
the
it could
most
have
he could
otherwise.
do.
Yeah, otherwise it would have just been the top three would have finished as they started, which would have been, if anything, more boring. We still had this race of will they catch down, will they overtake, well, how do the pit stops boil out? And one does wonder if the move was orchestrated by McLaren to use Piastri for longer on the hards to keep Verstappen under pressure, to force an error, to give essentially a stronger finishing position to Norris, regardless of whether they swapped him or Piastri, but it would have shuffled both their drivers up. regardless, it was well driven from both drivers, and I think you've got to hand it to McLaren. They've somehow done what McLaren have tried to do before and sort of failed at when it came to Hamilton and Alonso, the idea of having parity in a team that nearly killed everyone in it, including Ron Dennis at points when people wanted to throttle him to death. And they've
Proper
somehow
drama.
masterminded it in a way that hasn't had that animosity at the end of it. You look at the reception that Oscar Piastri got from Lando Norris's parents and vice versa. There was this genuine feel that they understand what one another's sort of respective driver has gone through this season and appreciates the effort that's gone into it. I think it's an interesting turnaround. As much as we love to sort of hate on Zach Brown for his sort of quirks and foibles as a character, I think maybe him, but certainly Andreas Stella have conducted a sublime championship, and getting the double, I think, for McLaren
Stella's
is
done more of a convincing job of being neutral.
mm,
I'll say that much.
yeah. Jenny, your turn.
Actually think that the way that they've handled having two number one drivers is that's what they call it. I think it's kind of like what you were saying before, put a shadow on Norris's championship. I think, like when you look at races like Monza's the big one, giving the places back. When Verstappen got asked about it, he was like, I would never have done that. And he used some bold words
Mm.
that we don't use on this podcast. And I think
Not yet.
that says a lot. Oh,
We usually say that before we get to Aston Martin or Alpine.
oh, fair. I'll wait for those ones. But I think it says a lot that, we're talking about these worthy championships, but it wasn't, I think we don't see it, some people don't see it like that because it wasn't dominant. It's the first time in a long time where we've had two teammates. And apart from Piastri's couple of weekends where he lost it a little bit, it's been, I don't know. I don't think that Verstappen should have been as close. I don't think he should have finished second. I don't think McLaren should have let that happen. Personally, I think if they'd have managed their drivers better, certain situations better, certain strategies, yeah, I
Uh,
wasn't fully
That's
convinced on
what I
their
was
side.
mulling over earlier. It was if obviously Max came out a while ago and said if I was in that McLaren, this championship would have been wrapped up ages ago.
yeah.
And I still don't know what the heck went on with Oscar in the second half of the season to understand why he wasn't able to keep that momentum going. But I do wonder, and I'd be interested to see what you do think. I think if you put Lewis, aside from obviously Max, if you put Lewis, Charles, George, Carlos in that McLaren, it also would not have gone down to Abu Dhabi, or if it, there would be at least a round to spare. I'd say they'd have wrapped it up in Brazil or Vegas. Heck, even Qatar would have been good enough. You've still got a round to spare, and like you say, I don't think any of them would have done what uh, McLaren wanted Piastri to do in Monza. They wouldn't have swapped positions, and I think that's why we struggle with it. If we look at how they've managed the season, we look at the drivers and go, "Are we annoyed with the drivers, or are we annoyed with how the team have handled them?" And it's this awkward bit of a little bit of everything, and that's why we're just not sure. Because like you say, we haven't seen two teammates in a top team with such a dominant car in this position in such a long time. So you've got all of that, but then we talked about this last week, Jesse. You look at the constructors' championship and how far away McLaren are from everyone else, and then you see that he only wins the drivers' title by 2 points from a team and a driver that essentially weren't there for half of a season. And you go, cool, you won, but please do some homework and look back at your season because if you want to be dominant like Red Bull, if you want to be dominant like Mercedes or Ferrari back in the early 2000s, this ain't going to cut it.
But this is an interesting point that was raised by Damon Hill after the event because he had this when he was going through Williams 1994-95 when he had David Coulthard as a teammate and he went to Frank Williams and said, "Look, I'm all for the idea of fairness within the team, but I'm your number one driver. Can I have that treatment for it?" And Frank Williams said, you're my two drivers. That is it. There is no preference. And Damon said the problem you then have to deal with is the fact that your greatest rival is your teammate who is at risk of sniping points from you every step of the way. We look at the way that Verstappen and Hamilton have won championships previously, and in their years of dominance, where they haven't had to fight a teammate, where they've had that significant second driver. You look at the way that Bottas and Perez were, you end up with that big gulf between your number one driver and your number two driver. They both still come one and two in the championship, but there's that separation. You don't have that sniping each other for wins, sniping each other for seconds.
And I think importantly there, the number two drivers were not going to, even if they decided we're going to throw the toys out the pram, they would have still been beaten anyway. You know, Bottas was never level with Lewis. Perez was never level with Max. But so even if you tried, there'd still be that gulf. So you know, like I say, we've not had this since Fernando and Lewis, let's say, at McLaren.
Yeah, Fernando and Lewis was the last time we've had two drivers on level pegging at the same team absolutely knock seven shades of shit out of each other. And Jenny made an interesting point. She said,
Webber and Vettel tried.
Yeah, they certainly tried it. But Jenny made the interesting point. She said if the season had been managed differently, I think we'd have seen a different outcome. And I think she's correct because we wouldn't have seen Verstappen sneak into second and we would have seen Piastri take the title. And I think that's what it boils down to. Is McLaren's constant indecisiveness of how they want to play it and the brilliance at their PR to completely mask it for 24 races for pretty much an entire calendar year. They have hidden the fact that they couldn't decide, or they did, and didn't want the ramifications of fans and sponsors backing away because of that decision. And I think fans...
I don't know if they masked it completely. We've all had suspicions.
We all had suspicions, but you don't... If you're a sponsor, you don't pull out of a deal like that on a suspicion. If you're Google, your Quadlock, you don't pull out of a sponsorship of a Formula One car on a suspicion that the car that you're on isn't going to be the one that wins. And I think there's years to come. I think there's going to be an interesting book that comes out, probably by Andrea Stella, about this year's season. I think it's going to be a very interesting one in the same way that Mark Priestley's was when he was sort of back at the McLaren days in the Hamilton Alonso days, because I think there is a lot to be said for it and I can't wait for it. But anyway, McLaren out the way, because we could just be chasing our tails here for hours on end, as we have been for most of this season, really, with trying to figure out what the hell McLaren are doing. Mercedes, we knew coming into this weekend that they were pretty much going to wrap up second place in the Constructors' Championship, and they did. Russell qualified fourth, finished fifth, and Antonelli qualified 14th and finished 15th. Not a circuit suited to that car. So, yeah, the usual anonymous outing, really, for the squad. Antonelli a little further off the pace than expected. It's very little to say from them for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that Russell, obviously, he went back to having a fairly anonymous race, but then still doing well. He's only finished outside the top 10 once this year in Monaco, and that was P11. He's had a stellar season.
Now, do you want to know the better fact about his Monaco race? His Monaco race, finishing 2 laps down behind Alex Albon, stuck in that DRS train, is the only reason why he does not join Hamilton, Schumacher, Verstappen, and possibly Alonso for the only drivers to have completed every racing lap of the season, because he was 2 laps down in Monaco because he was stuck behind Albon. That's it. Otherwise, Russell's season has been so clean that he would have finished every race, every lap of every race.
Which does again make me wonder what he could have done in that McLaren if he'd been there instead. You're saying about good overtakes earlier, double overtakes. I don't know if you saw his brilliant double overtake early on in the race. Think through turns 10, 11, and 12, and you go, "Ooh, he's on a bit of a charge." I was thinking at that point maybe he's going to go after Leclerc, get past him, and then go, "I'm going to spoil your day, McLaren," and help Verstappen out a little bit. So that was just again coming down that back straight. That's one thing to getting a double overtake done there, but 10, 11, and 12. That's another level of risk there that you go. What are you fighting for, George? You're not. You can't get anything out of this in the championship for constructors or for drivers. But like, well, love a racing, I guess, and I'd love to see. And I wish we could have had that on the main screen. And Antonelli just not there all weekend, was he? But and he still go down in history books as the last driver to use DRS.
Ignoring the rookie test or any TPC later on. But I do have a theory with... In a race.
In a race.
I do have a theory with Antonelli is that it possibly just left a little shaken or something still mulling in the back of his mind after Qatar, because he did go and speak to Verstappen and apologize for essentially costing him those 2 points, which
Interestingly, though, if he'd had those 2 points, it would have then gone down to count back with the results that we had, and it would have been podium. So I'm kind of glad that he messed up now because that would have been such a much messier way to win a championship. Is it's count back on podiums, not even wins at that point.
not at that point, but yeah, it's just one of
No,
those
but like
things.
when all the dust had been settled in Abu Dhabi, that's then how it would have
Hmm.
worked out.
But we said
Because Verstappen
Verstappen
would have
had
had
most wins. He has 8 wins over
most wins.
seven.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay then. Now, damn it, Kimmy. Now I want you to go back to Qatar. Okay, never mind. Scrap all of this.
yeah, because yeah, but it's just interesting that I think that was clearly still weighing on his mind. I think coming into this weekend, and I think that it's interesting that we've seen sort of Antonelli come through, have this sort of incredible roller coaster season as a rookie, from sort of having a very poor start to the season, I think it's fair to say, and then sort of developing into this sort of flourishing drive of that first podium in Canada, and then building on it from there. And we start to get more podiums coming in. We get a second place. We see this sort of building of him as a driver, and then we see one online setback almost crumple him for a race weekend. And we look at the fact that like the likes of Norris, Verstappen, and Piastri, our 3 title contenders this year, are pretty much emotional when it comes to most race weekends. Certainly Verstappen and Piastri have this ability to just separate themselves from everything. And again, it's one of those skills that you hone as a driver. And Norris has said again in post-race interviews, he said that I'm open about being emotional about things. I get happy about things. I get sad about things. I get angry about things when they don't go my way. He says this was after this Grand Prix was possibly the first time he's had that sort of very emotive state, that sort of properly being able to emote after a Grand Prix. And I think that's something you have to learn to set aside as a Grand Prix driver, is to deject yourself from that emotional thing and focus on the right here, the right now, the what I can do about my situation, because crying sure as hell isn't going to help sort of approach. And it's interesting we've sort of again had that contrast in sort of form when it comes to sort of headspace.
I do think a lot has to be said that, well, let me figure out where I'm going. F2, F1, F2. He was in Frecker 2 years ago. He's
Yeah.
come from nowhere and not even he's not even just been put up to F1, he's been put into F1 in a top team against one of the best drivers by far on the grid. I think, and everyone's always had this, I know in my house anyway, and everyone I speak to has always had this, oh, isn't Kimmy great? And he's always almost had this like Toto bubble around him as well. And I think that everything that he got after Qatar must have been such a shock as well. And you can tell like that. And he's good friends with Verstappen as well, isn't he? That would be pretty heavy for a 19-year-old boy that's just finished school. I mean, I couldn't do it. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of this weekend as well, the Mercedes didn't look great anyway. And I think, as we're saying, Russell's one of the best on the grid. I think he just had that extra experience, maybe extra talent to be able to handle a car that's not completely on rails, whereas Kimmy's still got a little bit of a way to go in handling the mistakes.
Mhm.
Not like, like the one at Qatar as well, handling those little offs in a way that Russell can.
Yeah. Russell's got the experience, having sort of grown and developed with the chassis that Mercedes has, which isn't perfect. It hasn't been since it was
Well,
introduced.
he's never had a top car, so he's
No.
used to having to drag the most out of whatever he's given anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's always been sort of Russell's forte, is finding that extra sort of 2/10 of performance from a car that doesn't necessarily have it. And when that really shows, when the car is a long way off the pace compared to where it usually is at a weekend, things like Abu Dhabi, where the temperature plays into it, you have that changing sort of temperature setup across the weekend. You have the fact that you do your FP1 and your FP3 in quite warm conditions, whereas FP2 is your only one that's really relative to qualifying in a Grand Prix when it comes to track feel. You're given a one and done situation for practice to get that feel in. And that's still a lot to ask of someone who's coming off the back of a rough weekend, who will likely had a very rough week trying to shield themselves from online onslaught, and then going into a weekend where that's still in the back of your head. You're conscious that you don't want to be in the way of a championship that's coming down to this final round because it was bad enough when there was still a round for it to be fought out. It's going
Are
to be
you
worse
saying
if
he
you do that
deliberately
again
qualified down in what Q16?
to stay out the way. I'm not saying he deliberately did it. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that sort of stays in your head.
Subconsciously decided.
The last thing you want yourself to do, and I know we joke about sort of Osama bin Russell and Taliban Antonelli as sort of like funny jokes, but it is one of those things that sort of it's not a reputation they have per se, but it's sort of a perception to a degree. And
Well, again, you only have to do something twice these days for it to be considered a reputation,
yeah,
and then you're stuck with it regardless. I mean, Russell still has that from his early days at Mercedes, and you go, he's just had one of his cleanest seasons ever, as you say, but he's still included in all of these memes and jokes and whatnot. And
hmm.
you go, what does he have to do? I don't think has he taken anyone out this year? I can't remember
Yeah,
an obvious example of it. If he did, so you go, what more does the boy need to do?
yeah, he's had like a spotless season, but again, it's yeah, I think there was a lot riding on certainly the mind of Antonelli coming to this weekend. And again, the Mercedes just wasn't going to be there anyway. So I think it sort of it doubles up really at that point and sort of forces him
But
further off.
Coco should take him fishing. That'll help.
Yeah, chance just to
Picture him
unwind.
doing that.
I think the end of the season came at the right time for Kimi just to have a chance to step away from everything, refresh, and get ready for the new season. Um, Red
Here's
Bull,
a team that needs it.
yeah, different story. Really, still not sure how we're going to pick through this one. Verstappen qualified first and would take the win. Sonoda would qualify 10th, one of his best qualifyings of recent days, would finish 14th. Um, yeah, Max made it all count here, but after the race, it's clear that he's in a positive place mentally. Again, it's one of the interesting things coming out of this year's Grand Prix season is it's been one that's been sort of taxing for both the McLaren drivers, but so sort of up and down for everyone else. And I think Max had his mindset sort of figured out early on. He was like, I'm not in this for a title fight this year, I
Mm.
don't think. And then, sort of, despite missing out on it relatively closely, he was still pretty nonchalant come the end of Sunday. And his drive was strong, commanding throughout, forcing others to come up to his level and compete with him. And that's always been where his forte is driving at his level and making other people come and challenge him, not dropping to their level and challenging them there. That's where he can just go off, be clean, be precise, and be Max Verstappen. And it'll be interesting to see how he goes in an era without Jean-Pierre Lambiase because there is strong suggestions that GP could be moving on. He was supposed to earlier this season, but yeah, but essentially family sort of situations suggested that GP would be stepping back from his role as Max's race engineer, but then Max turned out to actually be in a championship fight, and GP said, "Look, I'll stick with you through this one." Somehow Max comes first over family for GP, and they're trying to find an appropriate race engineer for Max for next season because GP will likely be stepping back from his role.
Go on the race first of all. I think there's nothing more, much like Piastri, that Verstappen could have done. Um, Ironically, and a bit of karma, I suppose, for Red Bull overall as a whole. It's amusing that had they kept Perez, maybe Verstappen would have been champion again. Tsunoda was obviously doing his best impression of Perez, but it was falling very far from the mark. And it's most useful he's been to Max all season, I think, this
Mm.
weekend, from the qualifying tow to his attempts to keep Norris behind. Not that it lasted very long. It struck me very much of Alonso trying to hold up um, Hamilton in Hungary a couple of years ago, and then Ocon having to do the same thing
In
in
Qatar,
Qatar, and then it not working out
it
at all.
lasted two corners.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and you go, damn, they might be different calibers on the driver level there. But yeah, like you say, Verstappen, he didn't think he was going to be in this at all, and also the fact that after 21, when he won the title, he said, "Well, I've done everything I've come here to do now. Everything else is a bonus," and he repeated that again prior to this weekend. And he goes, "Yeah, five's better than four," but I think going back to what we were saying about McLaren, the fact that he got that close in a car that he knows he would have run away with and probably would have wrapped it up with about an 80-point lead minimum is astounding to be that close. I don't think he's got anything to be mad about because, as you say, he wasn't expecting to be anywhere near the fight to begin with.
Mm.
So he's thinking, yeah, okay, cool, but I didn't need it anyway. let's see what happens next year, and off we go. And he's got a new teammate. That's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic works as well. He's the one constant at that team now. It feels like the one positive constant, in terms of like the big figures within it. Obviously, Horner's gone. If GP's going, then that's a big thing. Yuki's now he's not gone, but he's gone for all intents and purposes. And Verstappen can maybe step into that sort of role that we saw Vettel in at Aston Martin, but he still hasn't had to leave the team yet in order to achieve that kind of higher nirvana.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just a. I don't think Max is too fussed about Horner leaving. If anything, that was something that sort of
Well, no,
bolstered.
but in terms of like the significant pieces falling
Yeah.
away from the Red Bull that we know, he's the only one still there in that positive
Mhm.
position of having that influence to keep everything together. It's kind of love him or hate him, think he was a good thing or a bad thing. Horner was there, and he was one of the pillars of the team. So you take that out, things are going to change. There is that potential for calamity, but Verstappen would have helped smooth that over.
You said an interesting point that you think the championship might have gone differently if we still had Perez. What if we'd left Lawson in that Red Bull seat? Do you think
Oh, I wonder that many a time.
do you think we'd have seen a different championship again? Would we have seen one where Max was worse off or one where Max was possibly better off? Would Lawson have acclimatized to that seat, the team, the pressure, the dynamics quicker than Yuki did?
I think he'd have had more chance in the same way that Doohan would have had more chance if he'd stayed at Alpine because there was no expectation from either of them. And it's arguably his first time in Formula One properly. It's a team he's comfortable with and knows it's just a new car. It could easily have been the same thing with racing balls. It's a new car. You're getting used to it again, and you just need a bit more time to acclimatize. I don't think Lawson would have necessarily been much further up in the standings from where he finished off, but we saw him trying to fight Lando this weekend in a racing ball in trying to do his bit, and it seemed the safer, aggressive option was still being able to do something about it rather than what Yuki tried to do. So again, a little bit of karma there, I feel, for Red Bull, which I'm not against, but I'm also not necessarily happy that it had to happen here right now under these circumstances. But it gets that close.
I do think as well that if Horner would have been team principal instead of Laurent Mekies, I think that we'd have seen a lot more dirty games this weekend in terms of Yuki and Verstappen. I think it would have been another controversial championship. And I think next year as well, they haven't got Helmut Marko. That's just been announced.
Hmm.
I think, what we were just talking about then with Lawson and Sonoda, the drivers are going to have so much more room to grow without this. I think Horner and Marco were really guilty of putting way too much pressure on these drivers. And Lindblad, Lawson, had Jarrell have room to make mistakes and learn from them. I do think that Lawson would have been a better second driver than Yuki. I think he's quicker. I think he'd have been up there a little bit more to be able to make an impression.
Yeah, I think the pressure that I think those two have put people under. But yeah, I've just spotted the announcement how Marco set to enter retirement at 82. Should have done it a little bit earlier. Um, yeah, it's
She looks so young, Jesse. What
I
are
know
you
he
on
looks so fresh. He looks like he's decomposing most weekends. Let's be real. Um, the Red Bull, as they have been for quite a few seasons, have always been a sort of situation of what if, and this is possibly their biggest what if season to date. They sort of nailed it for the past four. This year, I think they could have done something different. I don't think Max could have done anything differently. I think he did absolutely everything he could, but there's still questions around them as a team. An even bigger what if, though, is Ferrari. Hamilton qualified 16th and finished 8th, while Leclerc qualified 5th and finished 4th. I think both drivers will be happy to see the back of that car. Charles didn't really like it either.
Everyone's happy to see the back of that
Yeah.
car.
Um, everyone's happy to see the back of that car because they know they're getting past it in about 4 corners' time. That's why. Lewis extracted a remarkable amount from it this weekend and made it count despite a tricky qualifying. the communication that Ferrari remains the key issue. Leclerc was driving like an absolute weapon and making some brilliant passes, much like we said with sort of Russell, making those passes at turns where you don't think you can. Leclerc, when he was
He
coming
was
through
very
the pit
much
strategy,
driving with anger and knowing this car, I don't care if I wreck it because there's nothing to gain at this
yeah,
point and there's
this
nothing
does
to
not.
lose. And I think Hamilton was driving with the same thing. I mean, he had to essentially do all of what he did twice in making his way through the field because of the strategy he was on. And it's again why I think if he'd been in the McLaren or even in Mercedes this year, we'd have had a very different championship because he just proved that the racecraft, that's not the issue. It's not the drivers that are the issue, unsurprisingly. And over the winter break, Ferrari really need to listen to both of them because it's getting beyond ridiculous now. They can't rely on, but we're Ferrari, look how great we are. When's the last time you won a championship of any kind? And WEC's nice, but that's not why we're here. It's Formula One. WEC could be the most competitive series in the world and have all the attention on it, but it's always, and every other series is going to suffer from this, just simply not being Formula One. It's the one that people will choose instinctively because it's just because, you know? And so you need
Records
to
have
figure,
branded it as such. Yeah,
yeah, which such a brilliant job has been done there that nothing can compete with it no matter how good it is. And so you'd happily watch the 23 season of F1 and go, oh, maybe though, maybe next race something will happen, rather than you going off to and going, yeah, this is great, but I'll still watch F1. And Ferrari need to figure out how to sort this all out. And Lewis was already saying after the race that he's essentially going to chuck his phone in the ocean. Nobody's going to be able to get hold of him over the winter break. He just wants to deconnect from everything, which I can't really blame him for. But I think he is someone who thrives off making a good comeback. The failures are what builds him up as part of the story. And I think if next year Ferrari can, if they can just sort out things like their communication, the fundamentals, we go back to China when we first talked about the fundamentals, Jesse, about if they can just sort those out, the rest of it is a lot more straightforward, a lot easier to figure because then you've got him taking notes and him making suggestions that players probably been doing the same for quite a while as well. If you can get all the communication sorted and you figure it out from there, the rest will sort of take care of itself. And you have possibly this Apex GP kind of resurgence of everyone contributes a tenth here and there, and you see this meteoric rise back up through the pack, and you go, yeah, because it is that simple. It's not easy, but it is that simple and straightforward. You just have to be willing to do it and not rely on the outdated methods that are clearly not working.
yeah. I think when you say Lewis is looking to disconnect, the only thing he doesn't really need to disconnect is his radio to Ferrari because they weren't listening to it anyway. But Jenny,
Not
go
sure
on.
it's connected in the first place.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I
Unless you
didn't
don't have
mean.
anything, then you're just
Um,
depressed by Ferrari at this point, just staring into the void, which would also be perfectly understandable.
no, I think he's a. I didn't hear you. Sorry. No, I just completely agree with everything that you've said. I think what John Elkman said about the drivers was completely rubbish. They're the best two things that Ferrari have, in my opinion. Best driver lineup on the grid by quite some margin. Um, I rate Vasseur as well, even though he's come out with a few similar things. But it's like you said, it's just something's clearly not working. It's not been working for years. You shouldn't, it's been more highlighted this year when they've got a seven-time world champion that's got three consecutive Q1 knockouts. It's not the drivers, it's something
Yeah, I mean, you
really
look at
wrong there.
Williams with Albon, or you look at McLaren with Piastri, and you go, "Oh, something happened there with them." But that might just be the driver. You know, you have more of a understanding of that argument when you've got arguably the greatest driver of all time in your car, and he's struggling to make it work, and it comes out that the suggestions he's making aren't being listened to. You go, "Hmm, maybe it's not the driver after all." Just putting that out there, I may be mad, I may be wrong, but I'm just gonna consider that as an option. And suddenly that's a radical idea to some people higher up in the Ferrari echelons, and you're just left scratching your head.
Mm.
It's a very strange scenario, and I hope that a lot of the work they put in over the winter won't just be to SF26, but also to the team and the layout and the
Maybe
structure of it.
maybe Lewis and Charles should just do what Adrian Newey's done, just go, right, we'll do all the jobs.
Yeah, we're team principal
We
now.
shall do this ourselves. You're all fired. We shall do this properly our way. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, it would be. I think there's a lot to be gained from doing that or having those conversations at least. I was going to say there's a lot to be gained from doing it. The only person I can think of that has done that previously was Graham Hill and the Embassy Hill team, though optimistic were never particularly brilliant. Um, but yeah, I think for Ferrari, there's a lot to be learned from this season if we're going to give them a positive outlook.
Much like this regulation set, we're glad to see the back of it.
Yes, yeah. I Damon Hill again. Another great sort of line from him was, "I don't think anyone's particularly enjoyed this set of regulations. They were impossible to follow. They were too big and they were too heavy, and that does not make for good racing." And looking at some of the seasons we've had, I think that's a fair statement. However, for a season to look back on positively, Williams in fifth, Albon qualified 17th, finished 16th, and Science qualified 12th and finished 13th. Not a great race, but again, we're consistently having to compare that to the weekends gone by, and we've seen them scoring podiums and consistently being challenging for the top five and staying in the points regularly. So all of a sudden, when we get a weekend where they're 13th and 16th, we're sort of a bit flabbergasted. But at the same time, the midfield has been so competitive this season that the moment that you're off the pace by even the smallest margin, you're swamped by the V carbs, by the Haas, by the Aston Martin, by the Sauber. If you're doing really badly, the Alpine might be in your mirrors. But yeah,
Never that badly. But yeah, it's nice to be disappointed with them
mm.
because we're not used to being disappointed with them in a positive way. Weirdly, I know that kind of contradicts what I was saying there, but it makes sense because it's just nice to see what they're capable of. In the same way they were talking earlier, McLaren was like, excellent, you're in this perfect position, you've got this all these great tools available to you. There's no excuse to do badly. Williams aren't quite there, but they're getting more in that direction, and it's really nice to see. So it's a good thing they wrapped up P5 a little while ago already, but you still then go, how are you P3 in Qatar and then P13 in Abu Dhabi 1 week later? But you're not, it's more you're not disappointed, you're not mad, you're just, it's like you're trying to encourage a child along after it's recovered from an accident and you go, come on, you can do it, you know you can. And then it trips over and you go, damn, okay, it's all right, we'll try again next week.
Yeah, I think that that's just one that they'll be happy that it's the end of the season with that one. They've already done so much. They've sealed P5, so this race it didn't matter too much in that sense. But I still thought that Sainz did a pretty great race. Some of his overtakes were phenomenal, as always with Sainz. But yeah, just lucky that they've not got that to build up from, I think, for them. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm just gonna.
they're oh, go.
I'm really sorry. I'm gonna have to let my dog out. He keeps crying.
That's all right.
All good.
I'll be 2 seconds. I'm so sorry.
Gonna say that it's quite a good result overall for a team that stopped developing fairly early on in the season. And so disappointed in one respect for the race weekend, but ultimately I wonder how quietly confident they are for next year because they go, look what we've been able to achieve when we've stopped doing X, Y, Z for this year's car and focus on next year. So as frustrating as it's going to be on one side of things, I don't think they're going to be too annoyed either.
Yeah, I think Williams can walk away from this. Obviously, a bit annoyed that there wasn't the performance in the car this weekend, but in comparison to their season, I think they can still hold their heads high, and it's a positive state of affairs. I'll wait for Jenny to get back, and then we'll move into Racing Bulls. With Williams out the way, we'll move to Racing Bulls, who had sort of a similar weekend in much the same sense. We've seen strong performances from them as an outfit, and this weekend it just wasn't for them. Lawson qualified 13th and finished 18th, while Hajar qualified 9th, but unfortunately finished 17th.
Really not much to say on this lot either, to be honest. They just had a bad weekend. We've seen them be up there, both of them, quite consistently. And then we've had weekends where they've both been pretty anonymous, and unfortunately, this was just one of them, And I don't know what else there is to say about it. They both drivers, I think, were worthy of that second Red Bull seat, and I think it's probably a good idea for Lawson to stay there. That being said, just because the boy needs some stability for 5 minutes, and barring any crazy decisions at the start of next season with regards to Hadjar at Red Bull, that should stay that way. Um, but yeah, I think there's just not an awful lot for me to say on them. It was like Williams one of those weekends.
Mm.
I'd like to think that with Horner and Marco gone, Hadjar is pretty safe unless he does something outrageous. Um,
Takes Max out twice in a row.
that might do it, yeah. Um, yeah, no, it was pretty awful. I don't even know where it went wrong with them because that's pretty bad drop, isn't it?
Yeah, the pace wasn't particularly there. And then obviously on top of that, it was just a race where other teams had a bit more pace just to sort of keep the pressure on them and get past them. I don't think they had a particularly strong strategy either. Toro Rosso's strategy department has never been great. And I think sometimes they just sort of get a bit waylaid. Possibly they were playing a slightly different game just to be in the right track position to sort of further advances up the field for Verstappen, let's say, if he needed sort of trains and gaps being made for pitting into. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario for Toro Rosso for Racing Bulls B Carb. Just sort of again off a season where we've seen Hadjar make it to the podium and we've seen consistent sort of top six finishes for them as a pair, and then we go, oh, you finished 17th and 18th. You're sort of like, well, it's yeah, it's too far the other way, if anything. Um, Again, similarly with Aston Martin, but it's the positive flip side to this. Alonso qualified sixth and would finish sixth, despite the fact that he apparently hates this car. Meanwhile, Stroll qualified 15th and finished 10th. And I guess the Aston has a circuit it's good at. I just don't think anyone thought it was going to be Abu Dhabi, Yas Marina. Alonso very much in a world of his own for much of this race, just sort of there after the
He seemed
start.
to just wake up at the start, didn't he? He was
Yeah,
really up for it and going, fine, I'm going to go and fight Mercedes and Ferrari because it was a bit like Charles and George in the way of it's end of the season. There's nothing to gain, nothing to lose. Let's just go for it and have some fun. He said before the race as well that he'd already scoped out during qualifying and practice where all the TV screens were around the circuit so he could watch as he's going on.
what's
You
the
go,
front run?
my
Yeah.
man, you're in the race. Could you just, for once, just
Yeah.
focus purely on that? But I also
Meanwhile,
love the fact that he nabbed P10
mm,
overall in the Drivers' Championship. He jumps 2 spots after the final race, pushes these other drivers out of the way that have been there for however long and have been like chipping away, chipping away, chipping away. And P6 at the way. I'm here now. Classic Alonso.
well, he knocked out Hulkenberg, who dropped down to 11th at Qatar. And let's see, who else did he replace? Let me find my big chart. Where is
Signs or Hadjar, I think, one of those.
yeah, Hadjar drops down to 12th. Hulkenberg stays 11th on account of having scored points this weekend, was just enough to keep him in position, essentially jumping Hadjar as Hadjar tumbled further. But yeah, for Stroll, more battles for him than Harold Goodwinson in 1066, if you get your historical references. And just sort of all over the place and driving remarkably well. Alonso, though, definitely still has that dog in him, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in hopefully a front-running new car next year. I think that's just there's
I
going to
just
be
want him competitive, just
yeah,
because of the mischief he'll cause. I don't. I mean, it's not going to be too optimistic and just yet anyway. Maybe we'll see how I feel in February, March time, but and go for Alonso third championship so he can retire happily in peace. But for him to just be in the mix, especially if when Stroll probably won't be, meaning he can just take control of Aston Martin for a year and go, give me everything so I can cause maximum havoc for whoever else is competitive. It would just be so much fun to watch, and he deserves a shot at least. And he's not had a proper shot since he came back.
I think we were all excited when he came back and he was top three with Hamilton and Verstappen for multiple
Mm.
races that year in that Aston Martin. Um, I'm not surprised that he's excited to get rid of this car, especially having a new one to get to next year. Stroll actually did really surprise me as well this weekend. I often watch him and cross my fingers, but he did really well considering the amount of battles that he was in as well. And to score a point in the last race is pretty good for him. Um, we was talking before, me and Fraser, he does this podcast as well. We was talking about how their reserve driver for next year, Jack Crawford, has also had a really good F2 season. And what you was just saying as well, obviously not wanting to get too far ahead, but he'd be a great, I think solid is what Aston Martin need as well, replacement for if that car isn't too good next year for Alonso.
Or for either of their drivers, to be fair. I think regardless of who you slot Crawford in to replace, he's a prime option. If you wanted to maintain continuity with Stroll, you might be better off going for Key and Shields, but it's yeah, yeah, Crawford is this sort of tantalizing prospect when it comes to Aston Martin because we've seen the pace, we've seen the accuracy he's got, and he's proven sort of every championship he's entered, regardless of if he's had sort of the front running car in F3, F2, that he's been a troublemaker. He's been in the way for other drivers, and he's had the pace to get himself into those situations. And even a midfield Aston Martin would give Crawford a really interesting chance to do something. So I look forward to that happening. I just don't know if I want it to be at the expense of sort of Alonso sort of going, yeah, this isn't for me anymore. I'd much rather see an Alonso Crawford pairing because I think that could be really interesting.
I I would prefer that one as well. I think you get the sense that if this newy car that's been picked up as much as it has, and rightly so, you get the sense that if that's not working next year, I think we'll see a very sad announcement pretty early on. But I think as far as replacing him goes, with Stroll, someone like Stroll also in that team, you need someone that doesn't make mistakes and is just consistent and solid.
Mm. I mean, I still have an overarching theory that 2026 is going to have two horrible announcements, and that's that the Aston Martin's not going to be very good. The Ferrari isn't either. And we're going to see Alonso and Hamilton step down from Formula One at the same time. And I don't want it to happen, but I fear it's rooted
If you
in
get to be
reality.
depressing, can I counter with blind optimism for a future that's also not going to happen?
What's that?
They announced they're leaving their respective teams and return as teammates to McLaren for 27
Christ. They would tear Zach
for
Brown.
one almighty ding dong.
Yeah. The first instance that they decide to
I
drive
agree.
against one another.
Go on,
Fall
say
apart.
papaya rules, Zach. We dare you.
Shove this papaya where the sun don't shine. Anyway, Aston Martin out of the way, we'll move to Haas. Ocon qualified 8th and would finish 7th, and Behrman would qualify 11th and finish 12th. Nearly double points to round out a strongish season. Ocon on a bit of an absolute stormer this weekend. Not entirely certain where that form came from, but welcome to see. Just overall a bit of a shame about Ollie Behrman.
Yeah, pretty much mirroring what you said. That unexpected points that has, but will happily take them. Ocon, a little bit like at the start of the season in China, I want to say, just came out of nowhere and had an exceptional weekend, really. And you're happy for it because, again, like I said when we were talking about Toyota earlier, I want to see them do well. I want to know what the plan is here. And he's showing that, again, you give me half a chance and a decent strategy. And he seems to be getting on really well with Laura. That's a really good dynamic. The great um, relationship there. You've got Io doing a really smooth job. He's obviously working very hard behind the scenes because that's how you get Toyota in there. I just want to know what the plan is with
Mm.
that. What's it all moving towards? What's your aim for next season? Because you could say, yeah, next year everyone's just waiting to see where the chips fall a bit, but you can't then say halfway through the season, oh yes, our plan all along was waiting for 27 instead. It's not going to cut it. You've literally got a perfect opportunity right here, right now. What's your aim with what you think you're capable of, and what would you be satisfied with this time next year? Everything else kind of be damned because you don't know how everyone's going to do. You've kind of got at least a few different ideas and expectations. Give us some of that broad detail at least, because at least we have something to measure you by. At least with Alpine, we know, well, your 100 race plan's not going well. At least we know what the state of play is there. It's not good, but we know what Haas were like. Are you happy? Are you not? We don't know.
It's all right. Alpine have brought in a new advisor. I'll get to that in a minute.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Oh, Jenny hasn't seen this. Oh, this
I
is a
haven't
Jenny, you
seen
won't
it.
be
I'm
happy.
excited now.
oh, don't be
You won't
excited.
be. You won't be.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, Haas just interesting situation for them. And again, I think they can round out the season going, okay, points, an interesting, strong performance. We move on. I think they are also ready for 2026.
I think it'd help them as well. I really rate Ocon, and I'm actually very surprised at how he's fared against Behrman this year. I wasn't expecting that. I think it'd help if they had the consistency that, apart from this weekend, Racing Bulls have had and that Williams have had. I think that would help them to make a plan. They're either towards the front, well, not towards the front, towards the mid front, or right
Front of the
towards the
midfield.
back. Yeah. But I don't think there's ever really an in between with them.
Hmm. I think the issue is also they never think of a strategy for Ocon. It sort of became a running joke that they just sort of start him on a soft option, run him for 8 laps, and then put him on hards and forget he exists. And sometimes that pays off for him if it's the right circuit where the degradation's there. But other times it just isn't. And I think it's because they have this lack of faith in their own strategy and also their own ability to do pit stops. It's easier to unwind a few seconds from a lost pit stop if you've got a long tire run to follow it. But it's trickier to do that if you decide to go for a late bolt on, if you decide to sort of put things under pressure. I think that we're going to see some interesting changes being brought in by Komatsu for the new season when it comes to personnel to really try and motivate this team on. If you look at the teams that have had that step forward, the interesting one being Williams, it's the amount of manpower changes and the amount of motivation that James Vowles has brought in. And I think I'm excited to see what other teams do with that. Sauber is going to be another one to keep an eye on, because if over the winter we see Jonathan turn that around and make it interesting, I think there's a lot to be proven from it.
I thought you were going to use that as a segue to go to kick Sauber.
Oh, no, well, I could do. That would be a very good way to do it, actually. But yes, speaking of Mr. Wiley, and we'll get to Kick Sauber. Obviously, final race under the Sauber name. They did have Peter Sauber there soaking it all in, and they did score points on that final outing, which is nice to see. Hulkenberg qualified 18th and finished 9th, while Bortoletto qualified 7th, meaning it's a complete tie when it comes to qualifying finishes between those two teammates, and would finish 11th.
Don't know if you saw, but Nico Hulkenberg got Fernando Alonso a walking stick for Secret Santa, and I just absolutely loved that. And interestingly, you'll like this for the history, Jesse. Sauber's first Grand Prix in 1993, JJ Leto finished in 5th. Got them 2 points for that. 2025, Nico Hulkenberg finishes in 9th on their final race, gives them 2 points. Nice way to bookend that, I thought.
Just pieces it all together brilliantly. And I think, yeah, it's about the sort of outing we're expecting for Sauber. And again, Bortoletto being around 11th shows the phenomenal pace he's got in what's not been a great car this season. So if we see them really moving it on for next year, if the Audi project is as promising as we're anticipating, I think we're going to see a very interesting season for Bortoletto.
I think of all of the rookies that have come up, he's one of the ones. Him and Antonelli are the ones that I'm most excited for that have come up recently. He's just a solid driver, and I'm a bit disappointed that he didn't score this weekend. He's dropped off a little bit. Don't know why. Seems to be a bit of a theme.
Mm.
That's the good thing, though, that you're disappointed because he's in a bloody Sauber.
Yeah.
And you're disappointed he's not getting points. That's why when we end up doing the season review, Jesse, we're going to have some real trouble with some decisions, including best rookie, because you go and go, well, it's got to be Antonelli. But then you go, Bortolo's in a Sauber and he's doing this well. He's tied with Hulkenberg, and Hulkenberg's not a slouch. And then you throw in someone like Behrman and you go, oh, but he's in a Haas.
Yeah.
The only easy decision to make will be worst rookie because we'll get to that in a minute. But with Bortolato, it's like with Williams, you make such great progress. You've got done so well in your junior career that somehow when you're in the worst car, well, not okay, say you're in not the best car, keep forgetting about Alpine, then Jenny's disappointed. But you're like, how? How are you disappointed? Because it's such a good job that he's been doing. But I still understand where you're coming from, and it's happy disappointment. We're having a lot of contradictions
Yeah.
tonight. It feels like,
Yeah.
but it makes sense.
I do agree that it is definitely. I expect more from him, but then maybe that is wrong with me
Have you treated him too
because
harshly?
maybe I've just got this mid-season Bortoletto in my head.
Hmm.
It was consistently in the points when maybe he shouldn't have been.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wasn't expected to be. He definitely should have been, but we weren't
Yeah.
expecting it.
That's right.
Mm. I think trying to
Damn
figure
them
out.
for doing better than we thought they were going to do, so we have to figure out how the hell to word it.
Yeah, I think trying to figure out sort of the best rookie is going to involve sort of running them all through some sort of weird baseball style sabermetric to try and sort of figure out who's done best compared to what they're competing against, and
That one.
rebuild them in the algorithm and all sorts. But the one thing that we don't need to worry about running through an algorithm to determine their worth on the field this year was Alpine. Gasly qualified 19th, finished 19th. Colapinto qualified 20th, finished 20th. And
Bravo.
yeah, bravo to them. There's a great shot of them absolutely beansing the Renault engine to its last in the pits, and also Flavio's guest this weekend, Nigel Farage. So they really deserve to have that shit outing. Clearly serving his constituency of Claxon-on-Sea very nicely from Yas Marina.
As always, as we know. When I saw you'd written that down, I thought ever so briefly that it was a joke I hadn't gotten the reference to. And then I Googled and I was severely disappointed, but not surprised considering it's Fabio.
Yeah, otherwise I genuinely have nothing else to say about Alpine. Like
There
they
is nothing to say. They
absent from
qualified
TV.
19th and 20th and finished 19th and 20th. Oh, Jenny, I mean, by all means, if you have some pearls of wisdom that you want to sprout about Alpine, now is the time. But I suspect you may not.
I don't think there are any.
We can move on.
There we go. Job done. Keeping us on schedule time-wise. Winners and spinners then. Thiemo, your winners, please.
Gone a bit left field, but Fernando Alonso and Nico Hulkenberg. Fernando for just his ballsiness early on with going, yeah, let's go and fight for some Ferraris and Mercedes, hopefully practice for next year. And then Nico Hulkenberg, not only for the Christmas present, but for being able to give Peter Sauber 2 more points in his grand tally. That'll be something to work out come the season review, how many points have Sauber accumulated over their entire lifespan in the sport. Not right now, Jesse.
Someone's probably already accumulated that.
Give him ideas. Regret it immediately.
Sport. 1 race victory, 28 podiums, 939 points.
It's not bad.
It's not bad at all. 1 pole position and 5 fastest laps. What was that win?
Not bad.
I should know.
That was Kubica in Canada, wasn't it?
Would it have been? Yeah, maybe.
I'm gonna say it's that, and you've not corrected me, so I'm gonna keep saying it's that.
Let's see. Let's go find. Let's go a quick dig through. This is the bit where we do the show where we do the research as we record it.
Well, we know you wouldn't know it because you keep forgetting who Robert Kubica is.
One time, and it was Robert Kubica, Canada. Yeah, 2009.
It's not helping you.
My winner, Lando Norris. I think he drove a pretty impeccable race, actually. And as much as I do like to sort of contest a lot of people's opinions on him, I think he's earned the metric this weekend. So, yeah, well done to him. And Jenny, your winner, please.
Mine is Charles Leclerc. I thought his defense on Russell in that Ferrari was impressive. I thought keeping up to the fastest car on the grid in that Ferrari was ridiculously impressive. I would have been more impressed if he'd have overtook Lando, but he didn't.
Mm.
But he's still my winner.
He put in a good showing, and I think again,
You're letting him get away with it.
He kept it interesting as well.
mm. And when you consider how bad that Ferrari is and what Charles is able to extract from it, it makes him really interesting as a prospect for should Ferrari not just build a good car, but also build a good team on the pit wall. Because then I think
It would have also been something that I don't know if Lando could have lived down if he'd been beaten. If the reason he'd lost the championship was of all the Ferraris in history to have gotten past him and kept him behind, it would have been that one.
yeah,
It would have been funny, but ooh, pain that would have caused, I think, for him and McLaren.
that'd be like having sort of,
Fred Vasseur would have loved it.
that'd be like sort of having like Behrman in the Haas come past you and deny you the position needed.
Or a Petrov in a Renault Lotus. I did.
Petrov was just in the Renault, I think.
I just Renault. Well, regardless, Petrov.
Yeah. Speaking of spinners, Thiemo, yours.
I've gone for Kimi Antonelli just because, for reasons we said already, it was just so surprising that after such a strong showing in the back half of the season, he's then not even in the points. I made the wild prediction, we'll get to in a second, that Hamilton would stay ahead of him in the World Drivers' Championship, and it was accepted as a wild prediction because of how well Antonelli was doing and how badly Lewis was doing. I didn't think of all the predictions I was making ahead of this weekend that one, as much as I'm hoping it would be the case, I thought it'd be because they just both finished in the points and Hamilton just was able to keep the gap there rather than being helped tremendously by Kimi just not being anywhere near the points.
Yeah, fair. I think for me, my spinner, Yuki Tsunoda, given the defensive shapes we've seen thrown there, expectations are high. You can really throw some interesting defensive moves around Abu Dhabi. And if you look at like the F2 as well going around there, you had these interesting moves, you had these interesting sort of moments where the drivers are putting pressure on one another and making these interesting overtakes both outside and inside through turn 9. There's so much more Yuki could have done, and he just didn't. And when you look at the way that ultimately the percentage points haul for Red Bull turns out, Verstappen 421 points.
So you're going to say percentages there of like 400%. Jesus.
Yeah,
bad even
400%. Tsunoda 30, which is 6.6% of the points scored by Red Bull this year were scored by Yuki. The remaining 93 and a bit was scored by Max.
What a bookend for you as well. Start of this season, how high on the supply you were for Mr. Tsunoda, and then finishing the year with him as your spinner. Who would have predicted?
I genuinely had expectations of him that I thought, oh, they've moved him up to the Red Bull. This is going to be really interesting. I'll give him a few rounds to get used to it, get dialed in. And it just never happened. And yeah, I think maybe I was too eager to see him, or still had too much optimism having come out of his sort of Toro Rosso days and thought this could be really exciting. And then just maybe we saw the best of Yuki Tsunoda in 2021 when he finished fourth around this circuit.
He's never going to let that one go. Jenny, who was your spinner for this weekend?
I've just gone for Alpine as a whole.
That's fair.
It's a bit of a disaster, really. But at least their engine didn't blow up.
No.
That would have been worse.
There's still post-season testing.
Yeah.
They're going to Mechachrome, whoever's running in their junior tests. Yeah, I think if you have a weekend where we could pretend you weren't there and it impacts nothing, that says a lot about your appearance this weekend. Like, you could remove them from the finishing order and go, well, they had no battles with anyone. They didn't get in the way with anyone. They didn't out-qualify anyone.
The only positive thing I've had to say about them all year is their livery. They finally got the ratio correct for pink and blue, and it looked tremendous. It's just a shame we never bloody saw it because they were nowhere at any point.
Maybe they'll think of something different for next year. Here's to hoping. Anyway, that's a prediction for another episode. Meanwhile, in our predictions review for the Abu Dhabi weekend, 1 point goes to Thiemo for predicting Verstappen on pole. No points for predicting the podium position for either of us. No points for predicting the fastest lap. 1 point to Thiemo.
Although, amusingly, Charles Leclerc got it this weekend. I was 1 week off.
I know, you're a week out. It's sort of like the Carlos Sainz thing. 1 point for Thiemo for predicting Hamilton to finish ahead of Antonelli in the World Championship, which means that Thiemo, congratulations, you win by 25 points to 21. It was close going into the final round, but I was let down in the final.
You were, but I shall be a graceful winner. Don't worry.
Yeah, I was let down by Oscar Piastri, really, I think, and Lance Stroll, but that's kind of more reasonable.
I did see that, and I just thought, how annoyed is Jesse going to be? I mean, it wouldn't have helped you overall, but it might have softened the blow slightly. You said top six, and then he finishes top 10. You were probably thinking top 10 is also a bit ambitious, and then the booker goes and does it.
I was like, do I go Stroll points? I was like, that's a bit too open. He could snipe an eighth or something. Sixth. That's a challenge for him. Failed to live up to it.
Too wild.
Fantasy Formula One review time, and for Abu Dhabi, Panchaks Novartis came first with 333 points. In second place, it is another one of the Panchaks teams. I'm trying to get the name quickly because it didn't write down properly. It was Panchaks Spotify F1 team, first time in the top three for them, I believe, with 316 points, and D. Ticolas 286 points, rounding out the podium for Abu Dhabi. Cat Dad's in seventh with 237. On the curbs, eighth, 232. And Mixing Pot with 192 points in 20th. Not a good weekend for me. Overall, the victory takes the win. Which makes sense, that's what their name is, with 4,179 points. Deticolas takes second with 4,079. Big Reach takes third, 4,026. And the Mixing Pot takes fifth, 3,851 points. Cat Dad's in ninth, 3,726. 16th for On the Curbs, 3,589. And in 63rd place, Kiwi Burners, 101 points, all in.
Remarkable, considering.
Considering every weekend he's lost at least 75 points.
Giving Alpine a run for their money.
Truly incredible stuff. And that is all for this episode of the Undercut Podcast, and very nearly all for this series of the Undercut Podcast. We will, of course, be back with some season reviews. We've also got F2 to look back on, and, of course, F1 to look back on as a whole. But in the meantime, Thiemo, where can you be found?
This week, I have an interview out over on the Curbs on my Instagram page with Australian Supercars' Rebecca Elder, and I've got a Formula 2 Abu Dhabi weekend roundup over on the Paddock Chronicle, so do go and check both of those out. They appear to be doing rather nicely so far, so keep that up, if you would, please. Thank you very much.
Excellent stuff. And Jenny, if people want to go and read more of your content, watch you, listen to you, flick through things, where can they be going to look?
I'm writing all the time on Inside F2. It's a pretty good place.
Excellent.
It's not too shabby.
Check out Inside F2 then if you want more from Jenny. And if you want more from me, you can pick up the latest issue of Classic Car Weekly on Wednesday. And of course, there'll be the Classic Car Weekly podcast. Plus, I'm on the internet as @Jesse on Cars on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So yeah, plenty more from me across all of those in the coming weeks. Otherwise, that's all from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We've got some seasons to sum up. So time to get writing.